So Pam, let's get started. So thank you everybody for jumping on here. We've got a fantastic topic to talk through today. And if you guys have been joining our webinar series, you'll know that we've put a little bit of a focus on the financials as it relates to hardware as a service in the last couple sessions. And I'm super excited today for our guest, Pam, who will introduce himself and his company very shortly, to talk to us about making hardware as a service finally, and I add that word finally, a financial reality. Because I know that for those on the call, as well as those watching the recording when we send this out after this webinar, there's a lot of questions as it relates to hardware as a service. Who owns the equipment? How is the equipment delivered on a monthly or annual basis? And most importantly, I think the biggest question that we're going to be starting off this conversation with is, how and why do I make this transition from CapEx to opex? And that's going to be the crux of our conversation today. So, quick introduction of who I am, if no one knows or hasn't joined our webinar series in the past. My name is Andrew Gross. I run our global sales and go-to-market team here at Excite out of our US headquarters. And for those that maybe haven't heard of Excite before, we're going to talk about ourselves a little bit later on in this webinar after Pam talks about the financial backbone that's going to drive everything as it relates to building an as-a-service business. But what Excite does is we're the technology behind the scenes. So whereas Pam and team are coming at this to support your P&L, to support your go-to-market from a financial standpoint, what we're here to do at Excite is to help enable manufacturers to not just cloudify and get your products into a singular remote monitoring and management and support cloud, but also commercialize and servitize your business, building out that storefront, supporting you with your monthly transactions, actually processing the as-a-service go-to-market with your different channels and customers. I got some slides to show you later on who we are as a company and what we do from a tech stack to enable that. But let's get to our special guest here, Pam Hutchinson. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself and CSC, and I'll let you take it from there.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate everybody taking the time to jump on this webinar today. I'm Pam Hutchinson, Senior Director of Originations and Syndication here at CSC. Been with CSC for about 10 years, helped launch our real focus and concerted effort on hardware as a service about 10 years ago when I got here. CSC is a privately held specialty finance company who's family owned, and we have our own balance sheet. So because it's our own capital, we're able to get creative in the way we structure financial solutions, which ultimately is what enables us to be a hardware as a service provider enabler throughout the entire market here in the US and abroad. So who is CSC? Been around for about 40 years, have about $1 billion in leased assets under management, do about 350 to 400 million annually in new leases or rentals. Again, been doing this in some form or fashion in the hardware as a service space for about 15 years, all the way back to the managed service provider, unified communications as a service provider, and then it expanded from there into numerous different industries. And we are the ones that help enable the OEMs and their channel partners to be able to go from a non-recurring to a recurring revenue model, which is something that really is a transition from the prior models, and we'll get to that a little bit more later in the discussion.
Yeah, Pam, I think that's great because, I remember when you and I first met each other and we were talking about, Excite as a tech stack looking for financial partners. You guys, as part of even your company ethos, it is all surrounded around hardware as a service. I mean, it's literally what you guys do, and have been doing it longer than most of others, especially banks who maybe just are providing a line of credit to a lot of OEMs or manufacturers looking to enter into the space. You're much more of a partner, and I think that's fantastic. And part of that partnership is actually supporting these customers in this transition, or I'll even call it almost a transformation from CapEx to OpEx. Is that right?
Yes, 100%. And it's a massive, it's a massive transition, but it's a transition that you need to embark on because the world is changing. We are seeing a huge drive from the end user client perspective for their desire to have an OpEx solution. And for the OEMs, I think that's really where I'm going to spend the first part of this part of the presentation on. But I think it's really important for the OEMs to take a step back and think about what a transition from opex to capex and an as a service solution can do for you, because it doesn't just you're not just in a scenario where you want to solve your customers' problems. That's always a good thing to do when you're out solving customer problems, but it's got to make sense for you as the OEM or the channel partner that you guys are supporting through your channel. So what it really allows you to do, which I think is the most important, is it allows you to have stronger customer relationships. You guys get to set an as a service contract for a particular length of time. It allows you to know when you can circle back with your customer, allows you to stay in constant contact with your customers. The second point is really it enables that market expansion. There's certain customers that you were not able to address due to the price point of your product. And you also are now able to sell to different departments within a particular end user. And what I mean by that is, and I'll get to this for the benefits for a customer, is, it really is now a financing solution for your end user and also a product solution for the operations folks. So you get some diversity in who you can sell to, how you're delivering the product, and ultimately what you get is you get greater financial control, which is really the reason why you as a OEM and the owners of your business, whether private, public, private equity, venture capital backed, why should they care about changing this model? And that's really because you have better financial control with an as a service solution. It leads to greater recurring revenues, reduces the seasonality of the business. You end up with higher margins and higher valuations, because all valuations in today's markets are driven off multiples of monthly recurring revenue. And the only way to make your business monthly recurring as a distributor of hardware products is to turn it into an as a service. So if I go back and talk about the recurring revenue streams, what is that doing? It's lowering your barrier to sales by allowing you to have a monthly cost instead of an upfront purchase. It's providing consistency from a financial perspective, which is really important. That allows you to plan. When you wake up on January 1st the following year, you know what your revenue baseline is going to look like, as opposed to being beholden to the capex budgeting cycle of your customers and having lumpy sales. It leads to more profit. I'm seeing people who are making almost 100% margin on their monthly recurring revenue, even when they might have had resale margins of 10, 15, 20%. And again, lastly, is the most important for your shareholders, is it's going to increase the valuation of your business, because monthly recurring is revenue is the gold standard for valuation these days, because investors want to invest in repeatable monthly recurring revenue. So as a result, what you get for the financial control side of this is you get a much more consistent, higher profitability and a growing sales, apparatus that allows you to do all of those things. I mean, and there are very few people that wouldn't want to have more sales at higher margins that are more consistent. That's essentially what this allows you to do. So then, I also mentioned it aligns the development to the expectations. So you guys, again, as I said at the on the stronger customer relationships point, you get to control the contract length for the as a service contract. So you get to control how long is your next development cycle of product 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. You get to control that narrative based on the contract lengths, as opposed to it being, you have one touch point with the customer, you sell them the product, and you don't know when they might want to have a refresh. This provides that point in time when they're going to start asking you questions. And then lastly, you were able to provide a fully integrated solution. Both on the services, the software, you can combine the software services and the hardware as a service into one bill. You can give away the asset for free, and then charge higher margins on the services. There are plenty of customers that I work with that do that, because the hardware is typically, the lowest of this between the services and the software that they might sell alongside of it. So really, it's a means to an end. So the ability to blend all that together, make it easier for the customers to say yes, is really important. And the last thing, if you decide to go down a leasing support, a leasing funded model, you're going to end up with a team here at CSC that has procurement professionals that are on staff that'll be dedicated to helping you manage the supply chain of that type of solution. So that was more focused on the OEMs and why it's beneficial to them. I think really where I want to spend some of the additional time on this slide is, why are the customers asking for it? And the biggest one that people don't talk about, but it's the biggest needle mover, is it reduces the tax burden. There's been a change in the accounting leasing standards called ASC 842. I don't think anybody needs to know that, but it essentially says that I'm no longer, as a leasing company, if I lease directly to Fortune 100 company, and I'm going direct to the end user, that's no longer considered an operating lease. A lot of that has to come on balance sheet as a CapEx item. So the ability for me to lease equipment to large enterprises has been drastically reduced. And there's a reason why large enterprises used to lease a lot of things. I mean, all rail cars, all airplanes, all data center equipment was always leased because they liked the fact that they had opex to hide from the tax burden that was associated with their business. When you create an as a service, you are undoubtedly a service contract, which enables it to be opex. Nobody's going to argue that the electric bill, which is a service, is operating expenses. The same idea holds true if you can turn your product into an as a service. Second bullet is it's easier for them to get budget approvals. You typically can have a plant manager, a division head, whoever it might be that you're selling to, might have signing authority for an OPEX contract on a monthly recurring basis. They are not going to have CapEx a budget approval. That has to go at budget season in Q4 up to the finance team for budget and planning and approval. The other piece that you can sell to the customers, and I think they value, is you can give them continuous updates to your product, whether that's firmware, software updates, et cetera, that you can really provide a hands-on approach to that. And then lastly, they like the fact that you can offer them as many different flavors of a contract that you can think of. You could do a usage model. You could do a monthly subscription. You could do, again, a free hardware and then charge them all for the services. You can really customize your service contract to the needs of your particular end user. So I think those are really the things that, are driving this whole move from CapEx to OpEx. I mean, I can tell you on a personal level that, it's a lot easier for me to sign up for a service contract than for me to make a capital purchase at home. As I made a joke to Andrew, I probably have 3 Netflix accounts and I've got 4 people in my family, 2 of which are under the age of 3. So it makes 0 sense. But again, I clicked that I would like to move forward with the service contract. So it's a lot easier for me on a personal level. And the same thing holds true at the business level.
Yeah, and you have those 3 Netflix subscriptions that are probably easy to just immediately transact. But the second you got to buy a brand new $1,000 TV, I mean, that's a familial discussion, right? Like that's a much bigger decision. It's going to take some time. But maybe in the future, they'll start to bundle those 2 together, right? Which is another benefit of OpEx. So Pam, awesome update on kind of like why this transition from CapEx to OpEx. In summary, I wrote down some notes here because there's a lot of good information on this slide, but I love for the OEMs, the profitability and predictability. I think that is just a major summary of like huge benefits to receive in moving to an OpEx form. And then for the customers, and then I'll include channels in this conversation, is moving from ownership to outcomes. And I love that because that's a mindset shift, right? No longer are we owning things, but we're owning experiences. I mean, from a consumer standpoint. But in the B2B space, it's owning outcomes, it's owning value, it's owning usage of things. And that's a much better approach for businesses moving forward. And honestly, the best part about this too is you don't have to just take, your word for it or my word for it. We're starting to see this, or have seen this, take place across almost every industry, every market that we come across, B2B or B2C, and way different types of product styles. We've seen this from automotive companies. We've seen this from technology companies, engine companies, lighting companies, construction companies. They've all moved from CapEx to opex because of that potential profitability to predictability, lowering barriers of entry. And one that's actually pretty interesting on here is the Apple move. We don't necessarily take very key note of it because it's so integrated into our lives. But when Apple, of course, using their iPhone in the B2C example, decided to not just sell $1,000 iPhone, but start to pair it and package it with service contracts and insurance, as well as, of course, hardware upgrades and refreshes, that turned into an OpEx model. And what's interesting, too, is it wasn't just their B2C, but also in their B2B model with their release last year of Apple Business Essentials, which began to now bundle multiple types of B2B Apple equipment into a single contract on an operating expenditure for their business customers, to not just have a lower barrier of entry of working with Apple, but things that you mentioned, Pam, of support and service or feature enablement all through the cloud. I mean, this was truly one of the greatest examples of tech stack, Excite, which we'll talk about in a second, and financing, CSC, kind of in one built in-house from Apple. But of course, they're Apple. Apple can do these things. Rolls-Royce can do these things with Power by the Hour. Peloton, big company nowadays, that can start bundling hardware and services and software. But I believe that these may be market leaders, and those that are on the call or watching this, as a recording later, are looking and asking for themselves, maybe I don't have the resources internally to do this. So what are some of the financial strategies as a manufacturer that I can start to implement, either internally or with someone like yourself, Pem, to help me get there? How do I get to this hardware as a service with these different strategies at my fingertips?
Yeah, that's a great segue, Andrew. And I think, there's three different buckets when you think about how do you capitalize an as a service solution. You've got equity and cash, you've got debt, and you've got leasing. In the equity and cash example, which a lot of people might start to pilot their program in this regard, it's okay to maybe pilot in that setting, but really when you're trying to launch an ongoing as a service product, you really, from a sources and uses of capital perspective, you do not want to be using equity cash for depreciating assets. These assets, your assets, are the only ones that are going to be worth less tomorrow than they are today. Your investors or your shareholders are not going to want their capital and their profits going back into a depreciating asset class. So it's really a balance of sources and uses of capital. And the other piece is you're preserving that high ROI for ROI dollars, meaning the equity cash for appreciating projects. That equity should be preserved for new sales hires, R&D, IP protection, things that are going to grow the value of your business. Nobody is going to get rich off of a depreciating asset. They're going to get rich off further development, further iterations, and that's where your equity capital should really be used. Debt is another interesting option. Debt usually requires an all asset lien, which can be troubling when you're thinking about offering simply as a service on the products that you sell. Do you really want to be giving up a lien on your IP, a lien on your AR, a lien on all those other assets that are a part of your business? And the answer usually is no. But banks are obviously very well known, and you can walk down the street and find one and ask the question whether they'll support you in this. And some of them will, but most of them will not, because of the fact that they are not comfortable with their leased product being at an end user's site. There's a disconnect from banks to be able to actually underwrite that risk. And that's why most of the time, if you go to the debt route, you're going to end up in some private debt type of apparatus, which could be venture debt, could be mezzanine debt, various forms of debt. that typically have pretty onerous terms to them. So you just got to be careful when you go down the true traditional debt route. And those debt vehicles should be used for working capital, strategic projects, and really you want to avoid, as I say in the last thing, them funding the entire business because debt providers always have a debt to equity ratio that they're going to try to maintain. And that debt to equity ratio is the debt is always going to grow. As you grow and deploy more as a service contracts, your debt's going to grow. And eventually, the debt provider is not going to have enough capacity to continue to support your needs because they have regulations that they have to stick within, and you're going to be breaching those. So the solution that we've seen that works most, and Andrew brought up Apple on the last slide. Even Apple, the big guys, they lease the equipment. And that's the important piece and the takeaway here is the reason why they want to is because you're aligning sources and uses of capital. You're putting a depreciating finance mechanism, a lease, in place alongside of a depreciating asset. It's a single asset lien only on the equipment itself. So you don't have, these complex liens that might come with the debt structure. The most important piece is the simplification of the as a service offering. A lease is simply your monthly cost of goods sold. So if a $100 asset and your lease price is $3 a month, you guys can charge whatever you want above that to the end user market. The $3 is your monthly cost of goods sold, and it's very repeatable and understandable, easy to model. Good luck trying to model and amortize equity and debt when it comes to a customer contract and how do you actually account for the profitability of each contract. This is very simplistic in the way to account for profitability of a certain contract. I've already mentioned it before, but you're aligning the technological obsolescence with your product roadmap. And then lastly, you can modify a lease or a rental if you go down that path, which we have at any time. You can return it at any time. And if you go down the leasing path, you can have choices at the end of the lease that can coincide and align with what your customers are looking for. So there, again, all are different strategies that are important, but I think leasing makes the most sense from a simplicity perspective.
Let's dive a
So
little
moving
bit deeper on that leasing topic, I think, right? And that's because you obviously bring up some good points about the equity and debt side of things, and even as an OEM, they're probably thinking, great, now that's going to free up that usage of finances differently, right? Because now I can use cash and debt or equity and debt differently if I'm not using it on my as a service enablement. So why more leasing? Like, let's just take it and break it down a little bit deeper for some of these manufacturers.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, let's start by what is a lease. Again, I live and breathe in that world, but I'm going to take a step back and give you just kind of the rudimentary understanding of what a lease is. It's where CFC is purchasing the assets on behalf of the OEM and leasing and renting it back to the OEM for a set term. Traditionally, it's anywhere from 1 month to 48 months. 36 months is our most common, but on the 1 month rental, you guys can cancel anytime. It's a month-to-month contract. And so that allows you, again, going back to my prior slide, to really structure your contracts with your customers accordingly. And we can align ourselves with you on a monthly cost of goods basis. At the end of the lease, you have three options. You can extend the lease for 12 or 24 additional months. You can purchase the equipment as the OEM, or you can return the equipment to CSC, and we will, dispose of it in a variety of different ways. The piece I bring up here, which is interesting about the lease, is let's give an example. You have a 3-year as a service contract with your customer, but and you're using a 3-year lease underneath of that. Again, let's use the $3 a month on a $100 asset example. If you were to come to me in years 4 and 5 after the 3-year lease is up and say, what can I get an extension rate for? I'm going to drop your price by 30 to 60%, probably closer to 60%. And you have a choice of whether you want to pass along that savings to your customer or you want to make additional incremental margin in the out years. Let's take the purchase of the equipment. At the end of 3 years, you could have the option to purchase the equipment and you could make all the out year profit for however long that asset stays installed. And you would have paid off CSC, you would have owned the asset, and you would be able to, again, make as much monthly recurring revenue as you want to, given the client relationship. Or the third option is to return the equipment. And you can be that player in the market that says, hey, we have a 3-year contract, and every 3 years, we're going to develop the next greatest piece of equipment, and we're going to bring it to you. And those are the different ways that the lease enables you to be really constructive in the way you think about how you structure this to your customer, and how you're thinking about the cost of it internally. On the rental side of things, there are a lot of businesses where, people want to have ultimate flexibility, to be able to return at any time. So at the end of a rental, you can purchase the equipment for the then fair market value, or you can return it to CSC to stop the billing. Otherwise, it continues month to month. There is a slight premium, obviously, because there's more risk on the rental than the lease. But most companies I work with are trending more towards the lease because they like the lower cost point and they like the predictability that they get from having a multi-year contract with their customer on the as a service side.
Pam, this is a really eye-opening kind of explanation of the lease where it appears that, like, from a manufacturing standpoint, you're almost taking a lot of the risk out of this entering into an as-a-service business. And don't take this the wrong way or any of the manufacturers wrong, but entering the as-a-service business, and I've spoken to thousands of manufacturers about this topic, it can be scary. Who is really taking the risk here? And a lot of times, if manufacturers are working on this in a silo, they're 100% on the line for this. So a partnership with you guys in the fact that you buy the asset and then simply lease it back to kind of kick off this monthly or annual, then go to market motion really does take a lot of the risk out of this on the financial side to begin offering your thing, product, device, hardware, equipment as a service. But I think, if I'm going to, kind of transition into the next topic and I love this next slide, because we're talking a lot about the manufacturer. But as we know, and I'm sure the manufacturer asking this too, there's a lot more in the value chain that goes into this, right? It's not like I'm just making something and I'm just selling it to somebody else and I'm done. I've got partners and distributors and channel partners and users. I mean, how does all of this come together? And where does CSC fit in the model, both previously and, as you and I have been talking about, kind of like this present/future leasing model, based upon really a lot of the feedback that we've received on how to better operate this kind of leasing model in the market?
Yeah, it's a great segue, Andrew. And I'm gonna, this is a little bit of a busy slide, so I'm gonna try to get you guys to bear with me. But I think it says a lot about the former and the present/future state. In the prior supply chain, I'm going to run through the left side of this page. And as Andrew pointed out, you all have your own channel strategies, which, the former strategy contemplates and the future strategy also contemplates. So there's no, there's no benefit one way or another for the channel versus strategy that you might have for the former or the future. But in the former model, the OEM manufacturer sold to a distributor who then sold to a channel partner. After that channel partner has got the inventory, they will then either sell directly to an end user or they'll sell to CSC, who in turn would then lease it to the end user. And in this scenario, the color coding is meant to indicate who's controlling the end user customer relationship. And, in this former model, that's being controlled by CSC or your channel partner. And really the OEM and the distributor are purely the supply chain to get the product to the market-facing people. In the present and the future state, there's two different options that we can go down. if you go down this leasing path, and that is CSC would buy directly from the OEM and manufacturer. We could either rent or lease it to the distributor and or channel partner if you wanted to keep your channel strategy in place, or we can rent and or lease it directly to the OEM itself. So we buy it from the OEM and rent or lease it back. And then the OEM or the distributor and channel partner bundles the equipment with the services, sets a markup for the monthly subscription fee, and delivers one-stop shopping, one bill to their end users. In both of these scenarios, in the future, you're either having your channel partner control the end user relationship or the OEM is controlling the end user relationship. And I think that's really important that, you know, the ultimate solution can align with your channel strategy. Are you the face or is the channel partner the face? In the former model, it was a little bit more confusing about who owned what part of the relationship, who had the control.
Yeah, and I think kind of this opening up of these options, it doesn't just benefit one market, right? Because even in that slide that we showed with from Rolls-Royce to Apple, from Apple to Peloton to Volvo to Signify, you name the market, there's going to be different channel strategies. Whether the manufacturer sells direct or there's a channel partner, service provider, distributor, dealer involved in the middle, everyone needs to be taken into consideration here. And I think, but correct me if I'm wrong here, Pam, I mean, what this looks like to me is enhancing the client experience. Is that right? I mean, because I'm seeing this user now kind of as the focus here, and the change from the former to the future is now putting the focus back on this user, which previously I think it may have been taken away from.
Correct. I think that that's really the ultimate benefit, outside of some of the financial pieces, is really the end user is going to get the experience that the OEM or the channel is driving for. In the former model, um, you know, in this situation where you'd have a leasing company be leasing it to the end user, you essentially have the leasing company is the face of that relationship. And that can be either really good or could be potentially really bad. There certainly are some bad leasing companies out there. There's some good ones. And I think that, I think that's really the shift that we're making here is really saying CSC is no longer the face of the relationship. We're just a part of the financing supply chain, so to speak. And so we basically inverted the solution that used to be provided, and it's also less clunky. I think that's the biggest piece too, is that CSC in the future state can provide a lease line to the distributor and channel partner or the OEM for millions of dollars, up to, call it 30, 40 million bucks, you name it, we can go up there to it. And you guys are able to draw off that lease line for individual contracts. In the former model, you had to make introductions to the end user, to the channel partner, and that made it so that not every deal got done. There was credit underwriting that had to happen at the end user level. But more importantly, it was just inefficient from a handoff perspective, therefore the amount of, reducing the amount of productivity that was occurring in the supply chain.
Yeah, and no one's going to know their customer better than the channel or the manufacturer, right? So, I view CSC now in this present and future model as such more of a risk reducer as well as a value enabler, right? I mean, that's really at the end of the day where I see CSC kind of fitting in here now. And one of those values, which I found very interesting too, just in speaking with customers and with manufacturers, that this engagement of CSC with Excite kind of being a go-to partnership, one-stop shop to build an as-a-service business is what's being thrown out there is called driving a circular economy. And circular economy can have multiple different meanings to multiple different people and markets and companies. But in general, what driving that circular economy is really focused around is a couple big takeaways. One of those things is entries into new markets. I was talking to a large technology company, and they said, "Hey, we got a big initiative internally we want to enter into a lower cost market. And by doing so, what we want to do is for all of the new gear that we're sending out in the field in an as-a-service model on a monthly basis, for the Fortune 100 companies that can afford it, we're going to put them on a refresh rate. And part of that refresh rate is we're going to take back that refreshed gear. We're going to refurbish it and then sell it back into a potentially cost-sensitive market or a cost-sensitive customer to open up completely new opportunities for that manufacturer. CSC and Excite fit in very well there because you guys can support that kind of leasing as well as returning of the gear. But also from an Excite standpoint, which we'll talk about in a second, is the entire tech stack to enable the user experience of purchasing, refreshing, returning, and on into the new market. So that's one great circular economic kind of value brought forward in this partnership. The second one that I found very common in my conversations with some of these manufacturers, especially actually with some large French multinationals, because there's a huge amount of government incentives around this, is of course the circular economic approach as it relates to sustainability. We were even speaking to a large American technology company, large chip manufacturer, who said, hey, circular economy is part of our company plan over the next 12 months. And we need not only a financial partner, but a technology partner to help us as a hardware manufacturer to implement this tomorrow. And what their big goal was that, hey, we've got hundreds and thousands of these devices or hardware out there in the market. And when their end of life cycle, without a circular economic approach to this, without something that we're enabling our customers to do with that equipment, it just hits the trash bin. Instead, what we want to do and take responsibility for the gear that we're putting out there is offer these customers not only just a monthly or annual way of purchasing and engaging with our equipment, but the ability to come back to us to allow us to sustainably recycle or refurbish and reuse that equipment. And that may sound very easy on the surface, but it's going to take partners like CSC to provide the financials around that, to provide the return and reuse of that gear to support that manufacturer, and very similarly Excite from a technology stack to enable that circular economic approach. So just two awesome examples I found in my journeys of delivering and deploying circular economy approaches to different markets in their actual strategy over the next 12 months. And so one of the things that we didn't have a chance to talk about just yet is, well, what is that tech stack, right? Pem dove really deep and I think was an awesome overview, Pem, on kind of where CSC came in and why. Reducing that risk and opening up new doors into opportunities that potentially weren't there when wanting to enter into an as-a-service business. And we talked about client experience, but what does it look like, right? How is my customer actually clicking subscribe to my gear? How am I building out my store? How am I starting to, when we talk about bundling hardware with services and software, how am I truly deploying that? Do I have a single pane of glass to offer to my channel partners to continue to monitor and fleet manage all of my equipment in the field? And that's now where the second half of this conversation comes into play and what Excite enables for manufacturers and partners out there, which is this one platform from a technology standpoint to take the financing from CSC and then deploy it with you and your engineers and your product stack out into the field and producing goals and value like centrally managing all of that hardware or potentially handling all of the transactions itself from customer to yourself. How many emails do you need to automate or taxes do you need to calculate or even payments that you need to process when you enter into this as a service world? Coming into Excite, what we do is we are the out-of-box solution to enable all of these things that you see on the screen and so much more as it relates to the user experience in engaging in the as-a-service business. And when partnering with someone like CSC, the financials come along for the ride and reducing that risk and enhancing profitability as well. So with those as the outcomes from a visual standpoint, I think the last thing to kind of touch on is what's my recommendation for getting started, right? I know we threw a lot at you today. Hopefully you guys will have a chance to go back and rewatch this, and we'll send out the recording and clips as well. But we broke it down into 4 main steps. And I think the first one is key, is identifying that use case. Yes, you decided you want to move from CapEx to opex, but how, where, when, and why? Like, what is the actual problem that you're looking to solve? And working with Excite and CSC, we can help define that. And then 2, initiate a pilot around that. And that pilot is not just from a pilot of a financial contract initiation, but also from a technology standpoint of being able to connect your products and build out your fleet management portal and start to create that store that you can deploy internally, where you can start clicking the button we call, or even externally with a friendly customer. And then what you do is move to 3, where you start to learn and iterate. And you can only do that if you have a platform that's flexible, right? If you start to try to build this on your own, both from a leasing contract standpoint, from the financials, as well as a tech stack, that iteration is simply more money and more time. But when you have partners where our companies are focused on doing just that, our iteration really cuts down on the time and investment that previously would take place, because our platforms are purpose-built just for that. And then lastly is the customization. You're ready to now scale this out. You want to start white labeling. You want to start branding. You want to start really integrating this into your business operations tools, and of course, your go-to-market tools, to really make this part of your company's go-to-market strategy. And I think those 4 steps are massive for taking this decision to move from CapEx to OpEx, to engaging with a financial partner to reduce that risk and increase profitability, and to finally partnering with a technology stack provider that is going to servitize the hardware and give you that front-facing platform to really go to market with that as a service strategy. So with that, we've got actually a bunch of questions that have come in. So we're going to transition right to that. And Pem, the first question that has come over is, and this is actually, I think you mentioned this once before, but I think it's a great topic, is there any limit to how much margin that an OEM can charge on top of that lease payment that you're engaging with them on?
No, there's not. Again, we are essentially blind to the customer profit margin and or the way that you're recouping your revenue on that side of the equation. So there is not a limit. And again, I've got a couple customers that are charging double my lease payment. So there's no better way to make 100% margin on somebody else's money. And also get the valuation of your business to increase. So no, and there's not any limits to margin. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I've seen everything from pay per use, monthly minimums, to, if you're a tech company, how much storage are you taking up? If you're a industrial company, how many units were processed on it? There's all sorts of things that you can do. And again, that's really up to the OEM itself and them knowing that their market much better than we would.
That's awesome. I mean, that type of flexibility to start just making margin on top of margin after taking really the burden of ownership of that gear is going to be huge for manufacturers. I'd love to hear that. I think we have time for one more question, Pem, actually. And I think it's an important one, especially as manufacturers are starting to think about it based upon both client and maybe even product set. But the question is, do I have to do a new lease schedule? I assume that means a lease schedule with CSE, a new lease schedule for each client that wants an as-a-service contract.
No, no. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to provide you what do you think you're going to spend to support, your customers in 2024, for instance. We're going to put an annual lease line in place. Say it's $10 million. You have free reign to draw against that, and you can put as many customers as you'd like on a particular lease schedule. We typically group it by month or by quarter, something that makes it operationally easy so that we can find a way to actually execute the lease schedules in a timely manner.
Perfect. Even better for scalability. That's awesome. Well, there were a couple other questions we don't have time to get to right now, unfortunately, but we'll add those as part of our follow-up. If anyone on the call or watching this as a recording later on. But Pem, I can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing this incredible insight on really how to take away this financial question mark as it relates to this transition from CapEx to OpEx and really starting to deploy an as-a-service business. If anybody would like to find out more information or potentially, of course, engage with CSC, if they found what today is super beneficial to them in entering this new go-to-market model, what's the best way to reach out to you or the company to get started?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Andrew. Best way to get me is either on LinkedIn or my email address is there. I respond to both, usually within 24 hours.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you again, Pem, for joining us on this webinar series. Can't thank you enough for the amazing knowledge that you were able to share here today. And from an Excite side, if anybody's interested in learning more about Excite, from our tech stack, as well as our ease and use to get your products into the cloud and begin servitizing your business, please go to excite.io to find out more information. You can also reach out to me directly. My email is right up here on the screen at androidexcite.io, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message. Connect with me. We'd love to talk to you guys about not just Excite, but also how Excite and CSC work together to be that out-of-box one-stop shop for your as-a-service business. And so with that, I'd like to thank all of you guys for joining this webinar, as well as for anyone that's watching this recording. I hope you learned a lot today, and hopefully we removed a lot of those question marks, both from a financial side and a technology side, on how to finally begin to take your product line and begin offering an as-a-service business around it. So we hope to both look forward to working with each of you from a technology and financial side to help you enabling your as-a-service business. And again, if you always want to reach out to us to support you in that, you can reach out to us at excite.io or cscleasing.com. So thank you all, and thank you, Pem.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate the opportunity.